Hello and welcome to One Cool Thing, PC Mag's daily streaming show here on Facebook. I'm Matthew Buzzy. This is John Burek. Today we have, well, a large, expensive Intel product. It's coming to you both in the form of this desktop inside. We'll get to that later on. But the Core i9-9900K chip, the reviews are out today. The performance testing's out today. We can finally talk about it. We've had it for a bit of time. This is the chip coming down from the Extreme Edition platform onto Intel's mainstream platform, which is a bit generous because it's still very expensive, but is consumer grade.
Yes.
A normal person like me or you may put this in their computer.
Right. Well, normal is relative, right? But we've got the Intel Core i9-9900K here today. It goes on sale. You can order it today. There are multiple chips that were actually released to the market today in the Intel 9th generation line, which is a form of its Coffee Lake CPUs. A little bit confusing in that 8th gen CPUs were also known as Coffee Lake on the desktop. So Intel no longer is syncing up its generation number, so to speak, 8th gen, 9th gen, with its architecture names. So that could be a bit confusing. So these are Coffee Lake chips, but they're 9th gen, and they have hit the market. Now, the key thing is, do they work in the same boards as the chips before did? Yes, with a caveat. Yes. And there are also some new boards. Right. So let's get a little bit into the chip itself.
And it's also affected the rest of Intel's line.
Right.
So there's a lot happening here. We'll try to break it all down. As I said, there is one in this computer, so we could talk about the computer itself and the performance of it later, but there's a lot of infrastructure around this chip that we should explain first.
Yeah.
So the i9-9900K, this is the flagship one. It is the highest price one in this new tier, which was 3 chips, right? In this
right
new
now
release?
It's 3. Yeah, the 3 overclockables.
So what are the advantages of this? How much is this? What are the advantages of the flagship highest end one?
Well, so the i9 here is $499, which is actually a new price high within the Intel mainstream line. So there's 2 Intel lines of sort of interest to gamers, enthusiasts, and power users. There's the mainstream line, which is on the LGA 1155 socket. Those are the smaller chips. And then there's the Core X series, which are larger dies, which work on...
Those are big boys.
Yeah. The boards that they work with use the X299 chipset. So when you're shopping for motherboards for these chips, you'll see X299 and you'll see what are known as Z370 and now Z390. So Z390 is a new chipset that was introduced along with these chips, and you could drop one of these new i9, i7, or i5 9th gen chips into it and it'll work right away. You could also use these chips with Z370, which is the previous generation motherboards.
Which is not always the case when there's a new chip release, but since this is still Coffee Lake,
right.
generally, it works on the same boards.
Yeah, however, big caveat.
Always a caveat.
Always a caveat. If you're using a Z370 board, an existing board, you need to have a chip from the previous generation in there to do a motherboard BIOS update, unless the board specifically can do a BIOS update without a chip installed, like via USB. That's fairly rare and only on higher end boards. So if you have a Z370 board, you might want to put these chips in. Just make sure that you have an existing chip that you can do a BIOS update with. And BIOS updates should be available for those boards, from the motherboard vendor as we speak. But you'll want to check that first before investing in one of these chips.
So that's some assembly may be required. Sort of on the package
required.
there.
Yeah. So the i9-9900K is kind of a unique chip for Intel in its mainstream line. Now in its Core X line, they already had 10 core, 18 core, multi-threaded capable processors. On the mainstream line, Intel was capping at 6 cores and 12 threads, whereas AMD with its mainstream Ryzen chips was at 8 and 16, a while ago. So this is sort of a new high in terms of core count and thread count. So 8 cores, 16 threads on this chip, and then the ones down the line, there are 8 core. But the key thing is that the Core i7, for instance, is not hyper-threaded, which is...
That used to be the i7's thing.
Right.
i5 wasn't, i7 was.
Yep. Yeah. Now
what gives?
What gives? Ask Intel, I suppose. So we now have an 8-core, 16-thread chip in the i9, but the i7 is 8-core, 8 threads. So interesting that the previous gen i7 was a 6-core, 12 threads. You're actually capable of addressing less threads with the new Core i7 on the 9th gen. So we haven't gotten our hands on the i7 chip yet, but it'd be interesting to see how that shapes out.
Degrades
Right, depending on the software you use.
Yeah, I don't love that. That feels like a bit of a switcheroo on consumers who are used to, or there's a feeling of, okay, fine, I'll go for the i7, I can benefit from the hyper-threading. Now you got to bump up maybe 2 steps above what you had been considering.
Right, it's almost like Intel created a new price tier,
in
a sense, between the top-end mainstream chips and the lowest end of its Core X Extreme Enthusiast chips.
Right.
The thing with the Core X is that the board's more expensive, and most folks don't need what the Core X does, which is give you a lot more PCI lanes. And unless you're installing multiple video cards or a ton of SSDs, it's just a lot of that stuff's going to not be used, and you'll be paying for stuff you're not using. So it's interesting. There's kind of a tier between the $300 to $400 high-end mainstream chips that was like the Core i7-8700K.
Yeah.
And
a fine chip by all accounts.
And the Core X's, which started around $500-600. This guy is sort of sliding right in between the two of them.
Yeah.
So that said, it's the fastest mainstream Core processor that we've tested to date.
Yes.
The Core X's, some of them outperform it, but it actually performs in most of the multi-threaded tests surprisingly close to the Core i9-9900X, which a year ago is and still remains a $1,000 chip.
We have a question.
We have a question.
When you buy a CPU like this, like what sort of expectation would you have for how long you'd be able to keep it before you need to upgrade?
That's a good question. I mean, it really depends on
what you're doing, but they do. They honestly do last. Unless you feel, I know people, still playing games on a 5th gen chip.
Oh, yeah.
You can keep them for years if you want to, 4 or 5 years.
I mean,
they'll run. They'll start to bottleneck you, but they'll.
Yeah, I mean, I've used a 4th gen Haswell for the longest time and remain very happy with it. The thing is from a few years ago, you were probably looking at a high-end chip of 4 cores and 8 threads. Something like this is 8 cores, 16 threads. If you do things that take advantage of that many threads, like video editing, photo editing,
gaming while streaming.
Yes, things like that, where you're doing like heavy multitasking, you'll actually feel a big boost from this. But for everyday types of stuff, not a lot of difference.
Not a lot. Yeah, I think the older stuff might be dated quicker than this because now, as you said, the core and thread count is so high on the base thing. If you buy one of these chips, either the new 9th gen or the 8th gen, or even 7th, I would say, you're going to get a lot of longevity out of it. These are, the baseline level of performance has risen in such a way that you're not gonna be like, oh, in 1 year you're not gonna feel like you need to upgrade.
Right.
I'm still on a 6th gen CPU from 2 years ago, and I really don't think I need to even touch my processor for some time.
Yeah, one of the things that in these current gen chips is gaming performance is kind of a thing if you're choosing between, say, a recent model Intel chip and say a 1st gen Ryzen or even a AMD Threadripper. There were some issues with differences in gaming performance if you were gaming with a dedicated video card at 1080p. The thing is people are buying a chip like this. You're paying $500 for a chip, and you're probably going to put a nice video card with it. You're probably not gaming at 1080p.
Yeah.
You're probably gaming at 1440p or 4K, and if you are, the chip kind of doesn't matter. You become sort of bottlenecked by the GPU. But when you are at 1080p, oftentimes the CPU comes into play, and these recent model Intel chips are actually a really good complement to a high-end video card or a mid-range video card at 1080p. AMD stuff made a lot of strides in its 2nd generation. It really isn't that much difference anymore, but in our tests, which if you peruse the review on the site, this thing is up there with the i7 8700K or the i5 8400K is sort of like the ideal gaming CPU.
Yeah, they did definitely in the materials make a lot of note of the gaming prowess of this chip, promising so-and-so more frame rates. I feel like there's a lot of factors that go into that, so
totally.
It's a grain of salt on saying, oh, it'll get you 10 more frames per second compared to so-and-so, but which is in the materials. But there's too many other factors to take into account, depending on what system you have it in, what graphics card you're pairing it with, as you said. So,
and are you doing a 60 hertz versus a high refresh monitor? If you're doing a 60 hertz monitor, you may not even notice the missing frames, so to speak, above 60 hertz. So that said, great gaming
It is objectively faster.
Yeah. Right. Great gaming chip, very good content creation chip. Like I said, tops most of the mainstream chips we've looked at. If you consider the Core X, the lower end Core X's mainstream, it's close. If you're just talking about the straight Intel and AMD mainstream platforms, AM4 and the socket 1151, it is the fastest.
Right.
So there we have the i9-9900K. There's a review of it up on the site. Charts galore.
Benchmarks for days.
Yep, benchmarks for days. Yep, we've compared it against Core X chips, Threadripper chips, Ryzen chips, and objectively 4 stars, not an EC because it's a little bit expensive and a little bit specialized, but a great chip. And if prices change, we would give it an EC.
Sure. Yeah, maybe not enough value if you're upgrading from one of the more recent chips, but if you're not, if you bought an 8700K. I don't know if you're really dying to get this right away. Like, I don't know who upgrades that processor that frequently to begin with.
Right.
But
if you're in like Haswell land or Ivy Bridge land, 3rd gen or 4th gen, that's definitely going to feel like a new day. Yeah. We had a question, I think.
We do.
Do you think it would end up on our list of like the best CPUs, like even if it's not the best in its category?
Yeah, it's up there. I mean, in terms of value, we're finding right now that like the 8700, if you're a gamer, the i7-8700K.
It's similar to Nvidia's new cards, honestly. It's like get the new thing if your generation's behind. If you're upgrading from something more recent, questionable like value wise.
Right. Yeah. You're buying a little bit for the future there.
Yeah.
I mean, but that said, I think our two big recommendations in this space right now are the i7-8700K, which is basically this.
How much
chip.
less is that than this?
It's depending on where you buy it from, between $300 and $400. And this is currently $499, and we're seeing it online for a little more, actually, about
Save
150,
100, yeah.
Yeah, and then on AMD side, like the Ryzen 7 2700X is actually an excellent value for people who are looking for power on a budget. That's their high-end second-gen Ryzen, which, yeah, I think it's around in the 300 to 350 range, but don't hold me to that. Someone could correct me on that.
Yeah, prices fluctuate as well. So,
So, yeah, so there's the chip review. Thousands of words on that if you're interested, up at PCMag.com. Today we have a board here before we get to the system that's on the table here. So a little bit of preface is that with the Core i9 and Core i7 and Core i5 SKUs that came out on the 9th gen, new motherboards came out on the Intel Z390 chipset. We got a few of them in. We're going to have some reviews up in the coming weeks, but I figured I would just give a plug for this one here. That's because it looks so cool. It's ASRock's Z390 Taichi. They've been doing these boards for a few years now with kind of interesting style on them. Now, what you get with Z390, I'll put the board up here so we can get a little bit of a close-up on it. There's actually not a lot of difference between the Z390 and the Z370 that was used with 8th gen. The main difference is that there's support for USB 3.1 Gen 2 native, so you'll have some faster ports on it, and also a sort of enhanced Wi-Fi standard, which is using an Intel chipset. Apart from that, they're functionally pretty much the same in terms of actual core chipset functionality. But I figured we would just throw this up there and show you. The socket where the chip would go looks identical to the previous socket 1151. It is still socket 1151. I'm just flipping it up here to show off the socket there. But a lot of cool motherboard designs hitting right about now. We'll also have a review of an MSI one that we recently received called the Meg Z390 Ace.
the Meg, brought to you by the Meg.
Yeah,
Sponsored
actually,
by the Meg.
I wish we actually had it here and had it fired up, but it's actually in our test bed, which is off-site. Has a infinity mirror on top of the
fun.
on top of the thing over here, and you can sort of look into yourself or ponder infinity or the transience of life and technology.
As I do every day.
Every day.
every
hour.
day.
There we go. But anyway, here's the ASRock Z390 Taichi. We'll have a review up of it in a couple of weeks. And what are the first boards for these 9th gen chips?
Yes. As for the system, we could just talk about it briefly.
Yeah, I'll take that
It's
away.
got first things
Who makes
first.
this actually?
This is the ASUS Republic of Gamers, ROG, as you may know it, Strix.
Yes. GL12.
GL12CX is the model number. The ROG Strix, they have a Strix laptop. This is the Strix desktop. This is I'll just tell you off the bat, it's very aimed at esports people. And I don't just mean like fans or casual gamers, almost the players themselves from the way that this is marketed and talked about and the features that it includes. It's really meant for like players and or people who want to be players. One of the main culprits, so it has this magnetic face, which has the optical drive, which you obviously can't leave home without. It has a hot swap SSD bay, so like most people aren't going to use that on a daily basis, but the idea was that, these players need to take their profiles and save their settings onto an SSD and take it with them between booths at competitions, so they have to be able to be like, here you go, put this in, so they sit down at their booth and they install their profile.
Right. So that assumes the facility has like 30 of these things or 100 of these things installed.
Right. So that would imply that this is one of those systems you see sitting booth side at Worlds or the International or whatever it is that they all have on. They have 10 identical models of these and they're all playing on the same machine, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
We can talk more about the components. We have a question.
Yes.
Can those lights on the front be customized?
They can, and they can sync. It comes with a keyboard and a mouse, and the interior lights here, which there's a LED strip back here, and there's also a little strip here, and in the M.2 SSD, there's a little strip of LEDs. You can customize all of those. There are some high-end components in here. This thing is very expensive as configured. There's a less expensive configuration, which is to say still very expensive configuration. This one is $3,800. For that, you get the Core i9 chip, which we were just talking about, the i9-9900K, overclockable, go nuts. For that reason, there's a Cooler Master liquid cooler in here, closed loop 120 millimeter. There is a RTX 2080, not a 2080 Ti. I'm sorry, that would drive the price up way too much more.
Yep.
It's already $3,800. It has 32 gigabytes of RAM. There is a 512. They have this thing called DIM.2. It's their own little creation here. This little weird housing is holding an SSD. They mounted it vertically in a DIM.2 slot next to the RAM. So there's an SSD in there housed with a case that has lights because sure, why not? There's also a hard drive somewhere in this mess, 2 terabyte hard drive. And there's a straddle of the graphics. It's not fancy, I would say, for something that's so expensive.
But
the LEDs are cool. The compactness and
Right.
the feature set's kind of the thing.
Yeah, you're paying for the smaller sort of design.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really actually heavy. I don't know if
I
you've,
believe
I don't know
it.
if you've
Yeah.
lifted this thing. It's,
No, I
It's
haven't.
not.
Yeah,
It's small, but it doesn't. Yeah, it's not.
it's bowling bolt ends.
Portability doesn't exactly spring to mind other than its size. So you have the optical drive should you need it. This magnetic door,
you
the
can take
hot
off.
swap. Yeah. Other than that, it's kind of straightforward. I mean, you can see inside. There's not that much special going on.
I do like the clear sort of thing going on over the
Yeah,
CPU
that's kinda
cooler
neat.
there. Yeah, with the ROG
So yeah,
logo.
liquid cooled the Cyan CPU. Obviously, the 2080 is not a cheap card. It's also brand new. So obviously these components add up, but it's a bit of a premium for the whole build, I would say. It does come with this. This isn't glass. This is plastic side door, but it comes with a. Actually came with an opaque metal door, like as is on the other side here. But they give you also this alternative, which has a really cool tagline on it, by the way. Concealed in darkness, lethal in battle. So.
There we go. It's concealed in darkness, but it's lit up.
But it's also lit and it's also clear.
we're gonna have to talk to ASUS about that.
Yeah, I would expect no less from the Republic of Gamers. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, but the fact that it's liquid cooled is actually kind of important because as we found in the i9-9900K review, if
It's
you
a hot
actually
one.
want- Yeah, it runs a little hot, and if you do want to overclock it, you either need a very high-end air cooler like one of the ones from Noctua, but you probably want to go with liquid. As a matter of fact, I think on a single fan, 120 millimeter, I can't remember if it was 120 or 140 millimeter liquid cooler, our reviewer found that he really needed to up it to a much bigger radiator, to
Which
do
doesn't
anything.
happen often.
Right.
It's usually adequate.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, do we have a
there's
question?
I was just going to say, what type of price would you put on like that sort of cooling system that you would need for this?
Well, if you want to do serious overclocking, something like a 240 or 360 millimeter cooling system, I mean, you can get all-in-one pre-built systems for between $100 and $200. One of the high-end air coolers would be anywhere between 50 and 100. One of the Noctua ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this we have, I think it's a 120, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So the thing we didn't mention about actually the i9 is that depending on the software you're running, on one core it will hit 5 gigahertz boost without much trouble and without sort of any elaborate cooling. If you want to really push it and sort of get it into the 4.9, 5 gigahertz range on more than one core, that's where you really need some serious cooling going on. But that's for folks who A, know what they're doing, B, sort of do content creation stuff.
Actually
that
need
needs-
boosting a chip that can reach 5 gigahertz on its
Right,
own. Like,
yeah.
You really need performance to overclock that, I would say. But
Yeah, and you also really, it needs to matter. In other words, like if you're doing large renders that take a lot of time, saving 5 minutes matters. That's where you're sort of in that, in that sort of performance zone. Otherwise, enjoy what you get out of the
enjoy
box.
the
It's a
native
pretty
performance of
great
the
chip.
chip. Yeah, it's more than adequate. So yeah, we'll have a full review of this very shortly. I'm finishing it up. What was that?
The lighting, actually. There was a whole thing with the lighting on this that we
yeah,
haven't investigated yet.
I've not messed with this yet. It's part of why the review's not finished because it's a funny feature. So you asked if the case lighting was customizable. It comes with a mouse and keyboard, a mechanical keyboard, a nice gaming mouse. It also syncs the lighting on those with Call of Duty for Black Ops 4. That's not something I've tested yet. It's supposed to be. I've seen this on monitors. I've seen this on other peripherals. Kind of use your lights as like a HUD, whether that's like ammo or health or whatever. The lighting will act as a meter essentially. So I'm about to try that out. That's kind of just a silly fun feature. I'm sure that would look good again on camera on esports if people were they show the shots of the booth and you see people's health degrading on their keyboard. And
Right.
You know,
Does
it's
it
just
also
one
do
of
it on
those
the
features.
case? Like, so if I'm nearly dead, does the case sort of start fading out?
I'm not sure.
Or
If,
turn
I'm
red,
not sure if these
sort
come
of
into
bleed?
play.
Yeah.
If these come into play too, or if it's just the peripherals. I think it is the case lighting though. Yeah, I think it's supposed to be the inside and outside of the case lighting too.
Oh,
so maybe
Given my FPS skills, this thing will be red all the
it's
time.
just constantly red. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
I wonder if it just kind of glows an ominous red if you're really low on health.
And then white
So,
light when I die.
Yeah,
sort of,
it's
I
like,
hope.
finally.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so I'll test that out. That's a kind of a fun feature. Like I said, it is clearly made for high-end gaming and esports and all that. So, sure, throw features like that in. Why not? If you're paying that much for this already, why not?
Yep.
We'll have a full review soon. But the benchmarks you've looked up. If you care by now, you've looked up what the 2080 can do. Okay, 4K gaming, very good 1440p gaming, and obviously
Yeah.
hundreds
Go
of
nuts
frames
1080p.
on 1080p. Yeah. So between that and the chip and the 32 gigs of RAM, you're set.
Well, did we mention the full pricing? On
The full price, yeah, it's $3,800. There are definitely arguably more flashy or better value ways to spend $3,800. It's not necessarily the craziest system, but it is small, it's efficient, it's got all the newest parts in it, so that alone is kind of appealing.
Right. And if you don't want to build it out yourself, it's all wired, it's
Yeah.
ready to go out of the box. And if you do want to build it yourself, well, there's boards like this, and there's i9s available
And there's
today.
chips out there.
Yeah. So there we
Yeah,
have
so
it.
no more questions. I think that is all from us. Thank you so much for watching. Full review of the chip, as you said, is on the website on PCMag.com right now. Full review of this is on the way. There will be more chips, always more cards. Constantly keep an eye out for component reviews and full PC reviews. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back next week.
Right.